Benny and Ruby's Great Bake-Off, Benny Bear and Ruby Rabbit were the best of friends and the fiercest of rivals, especially when it came to baking. So, when the annual Woodland Bake-Off was announced, they knew they had to enter. Together. Sort of. "We'll both bake a cake," Benny declared, wagging a flour-dusted paw, "then let the best baker win." "Deal," Ruby grinned, tying her apron tight. "Prepare to taste defeat, Benny." The forest clearing buzzed with excitement as woodland creatures gathered for the event. Tables were lined with mixing bowls, ingredients, and colourful frosting tubs. At the centre sat the guest judge, Sir Hogsley the Hedgehog, known far and wide for his impossibly high standards and deep dislike of soggy bottoms. Benny chose to bake a triple chocolate fudge cake. He mixed with mussels, stirred with sole, and poured with precision. Ruby, ever the creative spirit, went for a towering lemon raspberry chiffon, adding zest and flair like a true artiste. Everything was going smoothly until Benny, searching for extra flavour, grabbed a glittery blue jar from the spice rack. "Magical yeast? Huh, never seen this before," he muttered. Ruby, not to be outdone, grabbed a bottle labelled Essence of Enchantment and added 3 generous drops to her batter. Moments later, their cakes were in the ovens, rising beautifully. That's when things got strange. Benny's cake began to thump, thump, thump. Ruby's cake started to glow. Then, boom! With a puff of sparkling smoke, both oven doors burst open. Benny's chocolate cake sprang out, sprouting tiny arms and legs made of licorice. Ruby's lemon chiffon twirled through the air, ribbons of raspberry streaming behind it like a ballerina's skirt. "Oh no!" Benny gasped. "We baked them too well!" The cakes began to dance. "Catch them!" Ruby shouted as her chiffon twirled past, giggling in a sing-song voice. "Ooh! La la!" Benny lunged for his cake, but it slid through his paws with a sticky splorp. "I think mine's trying to escape." Frosting tubes popped open and began shooting icing like fountains. The vanilla went rogue, frosting Benny's ears. The strawberry piped a moustache onto Sir Hogsley, who squealed in surprise. "My quills, I demand order," the hedgehog barked, shaking off sprinkles. Chaos erupted. A bowl of cookie dough rolled off a table, grew eyes, and began bouncing like a rubber ball. Muffin tins clanged like cymbals. Marshmallows formed a conga line. Ruby dived beneath a flying bundt cake. "We need to undo the magic." "How?" Benny ducked a whipped cream blast. "Maybe if we rebake them, use regular ingredients this time." They herded the mischievous cakes into a giant mixing bowl. The cakes squealed and giggled. "No, I love dancing," cried the chiffon. "I was going to start a band," moaned the fudge cake. "Too bad," Benny said. Back in the bowl, chocolate legs. With teamwork, elbow grease, and a very determined spatula, Benny and Ruby remixed the cakes, sans magic, and popped them into the oven again. Silence fell. All eyes stared at the oven. Finally, ding! 2 beautiful, non-dancing, perfectly still cakes emerged. Sir Hogsley straightened his frosting-covered bow tie and cleared his throat. At last. "Now then, let's taste." He sampled Benny's rich, velvety fudge cake and let out a low hum of appreciation. He tried Ruby's tart yet airy lemon chiffon and closed his eyes in bliss. After a long pause, he spoke. "Both cakes are delicious." Benny and Ruby held their breath. "I hereby declare a tie." "A tie?" Benny blinked. "A tie?" Ruby gasped. Sir Hogsley nodded solemnly. "You two may be rivals, but clearly your chaos and cooperation make for something quite magical, without the actual magic, of course." Everyone cheered. The rest of the bake-off turned into a celebration, with dancing, no cakes this time, singing, and plenty sweet treats. Later that evening, Benny and Ruby sat under a tree munching on leftover cake. "Next year," Ruby said, licking frosting off her paw, "we read the labels first." Benny grinned. "And maybe just a pinch of chaos." They laughed, already dreaming up their next wild baking adventure. The Case of the Soggy Sandwiches. Benny Bear loved lunchtime more than anything else in the world, especially his sandwiches. Peanut butter and banana on honey sweetbread, lovingly packed by his mum each morning. But lately, something strange had been happening. Each day when the lunch bell rang and Benny opened his lunchbox, his sandwich was soggy. Not just soft, but soggy as if it had been splashed, soaked, or even rained on. At first, Benny thought it was a fluke. Maybe the ice pack had leaked. But it happened again, and again, and again. By Friday, Benny sat on the edge of the playground, frowning at another dripping sandwich. That's when Ruby Rabbit hopped over. Ruby was the sharpest thinker in Miss Maple's class. She loved mysteries, magnifying glasses, and making sense of things that didn't make sense. "You look miserable," Ruby said, flicking her ears forward. "My sandwich is soggy. Again." Benny groaned, holding it up with 2 fingers like it was a wet sock. Ruby wrinkled her nose. "That's not just soggy, that's soaked. You've got yourself a lunchtime mystery." Benny blinked. "I do." "Oh, absolutely," Ruby said, pulling a notepad from her backpack. "The case of the soggy sandwiches. And I, Detective Ruby Rabbit, am officially on the case." Clue 1, the scene of the crime. Ruby inspected Benny's lunchbox. It was a sturdy green one with a bear-shaped sticker and no holes. She sniffed it. No sour smell. She tapped the water bottle tight as a drum. "Nothing's leaking inside," she said. "When do you put it in your cubby?" "Right when I get to school," Benny said. "And I don't open it until lunch." Ruby murmured, jotting notes. "So something must be happening between morning and lunch." Says, Clue 2, the cubby check. Ruby marched to the cubby corner. Benny's lunchbox sat on the second shelf from the bottom, next to Tilly Turtles and above Oscar Owls. "Let's do a reenactment," Ruby said. "Put your lunchbox in just like you do every morning." Benny slid it in. Ruby crouched, examining the shelf above. It looked fine, but then she spotted a tiny dark patch on the wood. She pulled out Oscar Owl's lunchbox. It was damp. Inside, his bottle of grape juice had a loose lid, and a purplish trail dripped along the side. "Aha!" Ruby shouted. "Leaking liquid above. The soggy sandwiches aren't a coincidence. They're a casualty of gravity." "Huh?" Benny asked. "Oscar's juice is dripping down onto your lunchbox every day. The juice seeps through the lid seam and soaks your sandwich before lunch." Benny's eyes widened. "So it's not sabotage?" "Nope," Ruby said. "Just a leaky bottle with terrible timing." Clue 3, confirmation. Just to be sure, Ruby asked Miss Maple if they could test the theory. Miss Maple agreed and placed a dry paper towel on top of Benny's lunchbox the next morning. By lunchtime, the towel was soaked and sticky with purple juice. Oscar Owl flapped his wings, embarrassed. "I'm so sorry, Benny. I didn't know my bottle was leaking. I just thought the outside was sweaty." "No harm done," Benny said, grinning. "I'm just glad Ruby figured it out." Case closed. The next day, Miss Maple rearranged the cubbies so that no lunchboxes sat below any others. Oscar got a new no-leak bottle, and Benny's sandwiches were dry and delicious again. Ruby Rabbit added a new case to her detective journal and even drew a little sandwich with raindrops and a big red X over it. "I think this might have been your tastiest mystery yet," Benny said, chomping into a perfectly crisp sandwich. Ruby beamed. "Every good mystery has a satisfying ending." The Treehouse Time Capsule. In the heart of Maplewood Forest, tucked between 2 tall oaks, stood a rickety old treehouse that belonged to Benny Bear and Ruby Rabbit. The treehouse had been their secret hideaway for as long as they could remember, full of maps, board games, and half-eaten cookie tins. One sunny afternoon, while cleaning out the dusty floorboards, Benny's paw hit something hard beneath a loose plank. "Ruby, come here," Benny said, tugging the plank free. Beneath it was a rusty metal box, sealed shut with a latch. A faded label read, "Time Capsule. Open in the future." Ruby's ears twitched with excitement. "A time capsule? Who do you think left it here? I don't know, Benny said, unlatching the box. But let's find out. Inside were 5 strange items. A crumpled photograph of 2 raccoons in explorer hats. A wooden whistle with faded carvings. A patch that said Maplewood Moon Watchers. A tiny bottle filled with glittering green dust. A half-written letter signed only, "From your future self." They stared at the objects, puzzled. Let's find out who left this, Ruby said. Each item must have a story. 1, the photograph. Their first clue was the photo. They took it to old Mrs. Owl, who ran the library tree. Oh, I remember these 2, she said, peering over her glasses. Ranger Rick and his brother Rascal. They explored all of Maplewood in the 60s. The treehouse used to be their base. Did they bury the capsule? Benny asked. Mrs. Owl chuckled. Could be. They were always planning for the future. The wooden whistle. Next, they visited Grandpa Beaver, the oldest musician in the forest. That whistle, he said, inspecting it. I made those for the Firefly Festival. We'd play them to guide the fireflies across the lake. He blew into it. A soft, eerie tone echoed through the woods. That sound, Benny whispered, and suddenly hundreds of fireflies twinkled through the branches, drawn to the sound like magic. Ruby gasped. It still works. The Moon Watcher's patch. The patch puzzled them most. They took it to Stella Skunk, who loved all things space. Maplewood Moon Watchers was a club, she explained, started by forest kids who wanted to find aliens or at least watch the stars. She led them to a hilltop where the sky stretched wide. Here's where we'd lay and make up stories about constellations, she said, pointing at the stars. Ruby smiled. It must have meant a lot to them. The glittering dust. They weren't sure who could help with the green dust, so they visited Mira Mole, who dabbled in potions and peculiar things. This, she whispered, holding it to the light, is dream pollen. Rare stuff. It was collected from dreaming daisies that only bloom once every 5 years. What does it do? Benny asked. Mira tapped the bottle gently. Sprinkle a pinch before sleep, and your dreams will feel real. That night they tried it. Benny dreamed he could fly. Ruby dreamed of dancing on the moon. The letter, only the letter remained. It read, Dear you, if you're reading this, you found our time capsule. We hoped someone curious and kind would open it one day. Each object holds a story, a piece of the past. We wanted to leave behind a little magic, a little wonder, and a reminder that every day is an adventure or, so, keep exploring, keep dreaming. From your future self. Benny and Ruby sat quietly in the treehouse, the objects spread between them. Maybe it was us who were meant to find it, Ruby whispered. Maybe one day we'll make our own time capsule, Benny said. For future forest friends. Ruby grinned. Let's start now. I've got a comic I drew last week. And I've got my lucky marble, Benny added. They found an empty box, wrote their own letter, and placed it gently inside. Before sealing it, Benny paused. Let's add one more thing, he said, slipping in the photo of the raccoons. And as the sun dipped low and fireflies began to dance again, 2 young friends buried their own bit of wonder beneath the treehouse floor, ready for the future. Ruby Rabbit and the Runaway Balloon. A sky-high adventure. It was a bright, breezy morning in Willow Meadow, and Ruby Rabbit was hopping with excitement. Her best friend, Benny Bear, had promised her a surprise, and Benny never disappointed. Close your eyes, Benny said with a wide grin, holding something behind his back. Ruby squeezed her eyes shut. She could hear a soft rustling and a little squeak. Okay, open them. Floating in front of her, tied to a red ribbon, was the most beautiful balloon she had ever seen. It shimmered in the sunlight, a swirl of purple, gold, and blue, like a little planet of joy. Oh, Benny, it's perfect! Ruby exclaimed, hugging her friend and clutching the balloon's string. "I'll treasure it forever." But just as she said that, a sudden gust of wind swept through the meadow. "Watch out!" Benny shouted. The ribbon slipped from Ruby's paws and the balloon soared upward, higher and higher, until it was just a twinkle against the blue sky. "No!" Ruby cried. "Come back!" Without a second thought, she dashed after it, ears flapping and paws pounding the ground. Benny followed close behind, his fluffy legs pumping fast. The balloon floated over the hills and trees, dancing on the wind. It looked like it was teasing them, drifting just close enough to see, but far enough to stay out of reach. "We'll never catch it on foot," Ruby panted. Benny looked up, then pointed. "Look! Feathers!" A shadow passed over them, and they saw a flock of finches swooping and spinning overhead. Ruby cupped her paws around her mouth. "Birds, can you help us catch a balloon?" The finches circled back and chirped curiously. One, a bright yellow finch named Pippa, fluttered down. "Chasing the wind, are you?" Pippa asked. "It's my special balloon," Ruby explained. "It floated away and it means a lot to me." Pippa chirped something to her flock, then nodded. "We'll help, but you'll have to come with us." Ruby and Benny looked at each other. "How?" With a flutter of wings and a whirlwind of feathers, the finches brought out an old hot air balloon basket tangled in the trees. Working together, the birds lifted it and tied it with vines and leaves. With some clever thinking and a lot of flapping, the birds filled a large leaf sack with warm air from the sun-drenched rocks and created their own little flying contraption. Ruby and Benny climbed into the basket, holding on tightly. With a final push and a shout of, "Let's go!" from Pippa, they lifted off the ground and soared into the sky. The wind whooshed past their ears. Willow Meadow grew smaller and smaller beneath them as the birds guided the basket through puffs of cloud. "There it is," Benny cried, pointing to a glimmer in the distance. The runaway balloon bobbed above a sparkling lake, caught in a breeze that pulled it toward the mountains. "Faster, Pippa," Ruby called. The finches flapped harder, wings ablur. The basket swayed and tilted as they caught up to the balloon. Ruby stood on tiptoe, paws outstretched. Almost. There. But just as she reached for it, a sudden gust sent the balloon spinning upward and into a thick patch of clouds. "Oh no," Ruby moaned. "Wait," said Pippa. "Someone else is coming." Out of the clouds, a pair of giant wings appeared. It was Garrow, the wise old goose who lived by the lake. He soared beside them, graceful and calm. "Lost something?" he honked. Ruby nodded, eyes wide. With a nod, Garrow tilted his wings and rose into the clouds. Moments later he returned, gently holding the balloon's ribbon in his beak. He glided down to the basket and handed it to Ruby. She gasped. "You found it. Thank you, Garrow." The old goose chuckled. "Even the sky listens to kindness." With cheers from the birds and a big bear hug from Benny, Ruby hugged her balloon tight. "I promise I'll never let you go again," she whispered. As the sun began to set, casting golden light over the clouds, the birds guided the balloon basket gently back to Willow Meadow. Back on the ground, Ruby and Benny flopped into the grass, breathless and happy. "What a wild ride," Benny said. Ruby grinned, her balloon safe in her paw. "The best adventure ever, and all because of a runaway balloon." Ruby's Wild Ride. It was a bright, breezy morning in Whiskerwood Forest, and Ruby Rabbit had an idea, one of her big ideas. "Benny," she called, hopping through the ferns toward her best friend's den, "I've got the perfect plan for today." Benny Bear looked up from his book, blinking sleepily. "Is it nap time? Because I had that planned already." "Nope," Ruby beamed. "It's go-kart day." Benny scratched his fuzzy head. "What's a go-kart?" Ruby's eyes sparkled. Only the fastest, funnest invention you've ever ridden, and we're going to build one. Half an hour later, Ruby stood proudly next to a pile of gathered junk. 2 old wagon wheels, a couple of tree branches, a rusty frying pan, and Benny's favourite hammock. "Wait a second," Benny said, eyeing the familiar fabric. "Is that my hammock?" "It was just lying there doing nothing," Ruby said, already tying it between the branches. "Now it's going to be the seat of speed." Benny sighed. "OK, but if this thing crashes, I want my hammock back." With teamwork and a lot of hopping and grunting, they finally assembled the go-kart. It looked wobbly. The wagon wheels were lopsided, the frying pan was stuck on the front for steering, and the whole thing creaked ominously. "I call it the Bunny Blaster 3000, Ruby declared. "Shouldn't we test it?" Benny asked. "That's the plan," Ruby grinned, climbing in. "Just a quick roll from the top of Acorn Hill." "Acorn Hill?" Benny's eyes widened. "That's pretty steep." But Ruby was already at the top, pulling her goggles down and waving. "Clear the path, Benny, full speed ahead." Before Benny could stop her, Ruby gave a mighty shove, and the Bunny Blaster 3000 sprang to life. At first, it rolled gently. "Whee!" Ruby cheered. Then it rolled faster. "Uh-oh," she muttered, gripping the frying pan tightly. Then it rocketed down the hill like a wild squirrel on espresso. "Kerr! Wah!" Ruby screamed, swerving past trees, over rocks, and through startled patches of dandelions. Leaves flew, squirrels ducked, and a family of turtles ran for cover. Benny gasped. "Ruby's gone turbo!" He grabbed his scooter, made from an old ironing board and 2 roller skates, and raced after her. "Hang on, Ruby!" Ruby was not hanging on. The Bunny Blaster bounced off a log, spun in the air, and landed in a mud puddle with a massive splat. "I should have installed brakes," she shouted as the go-kart shot out of the puddle like a watermelon seed. She zipped through a blueberry patch, picking up speed and berries in every crevice. Benny huffed as he scooted behind her. "She's heading for Crinkle Creek." Sure enough, Ruby screamed, "I'm heading for Crinkle Creek." The go-kart hit a bump, caught air and soared briefly before landing in a splash right in the middle of the creek. The cart skidded, spun, and finally stopped. Ruby sat in the soaking hammock, dazed, dripping, and covered in blueberries. Benny rolled up just in time, panting. "Are you okay?" Ruby blinked. "That was awesome." Benny laughed and helped her out. "You look like a flying blueberry pie." Ruby grinned. "Did you see the airtime I got over that log?" "I saw my hammock getting airborne, if that counts," Benny said, wringing out a corner of the soggy fabric. They dragged the soggy remains of the Bunny Blaster 3000 back up the hill. It had lost a wheel, the frying pan was bent, and the hammock, well, it had seen better days. Back at Benny's den, Ruby sketched ideas in the dirt with a stick. "If we reinforce the wheels and add a parachute..." Benny shook his head with a chuckle. "Next time, let's just build a tree swing." Ruby looked up. "Oh, but what if we rocket launch it from the tree top?" Benny groaned and flopped onto the grass. "I'm never getting my hammock back, am I?" Ruby winked. "Not unless you want the front row seat on Ruby's Wild Ride 2, Sky Edition." Benny smiled, already bracing himself for the next adventure.